It's in the European for those who produce our goods and services.
Mr. Stuart Hosey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly associate myself with the words from the Shadow Chancellor and the Chancellor on the late Joe Cox? Can I also thank the Chancellor for what he said about the Tay Cities deal? I note that's slightly different to the words in the Red Book, so we'll take him at face value from the dispatch box. In his attempt to clamp down on evasion, it was disappointing there was no reference made to Scottish limited partnerships. And in terms of fairness overall, one would have thought there would have been more than or any reference to the WASPy campaign and the unfairness for those women. However, the Chancellor did give us plenty of information today, but with no more than a kind of glib reference to being match fit at the beginning and a bit of deflection. Very little actually on the elephant in the room, which is Brexit. And it's not as if the Treasury don't know what the consequences will be. Their own assessment tells us that tax yield could be down 66 billion a year after 15 years, GDP down perhaps 9.5%, a figure confirmed by the LSE as a result of reduced trade, reducing productivity. That amounts to some £6,500 per year per household. So where was the plan to ensure there was no hard Brexit, to maintain access to the single market? Where was the plan to mitigate the loss in tax yield and GDP? And although he said a considerable amount, and I welcome some of it up to a point, about capital investment and research and development, where was the fully developed plan to actually boost productivity? You see, Mr. Speaker, we don't go into this next period from a position of strength. UK GDP, as the Chancellor knows, is already approaching being 20% lower than it would have been if we'd achieved even a 2% trend growth rate since 2008. And our argument is the austerity of this and the previous government sucked consumption out of the economy, weakening recovery. It is an error I fear they're set to repeat again. Growth barely reaches 2% for the forecast period, and although he sensibly didn't put a date on it, the Chancellor is still targeting a surplus in the economy, perhaps again before recovery has been secured. May I say a few words about the fiscal charter? I'm glad he's changed it, because the previous permanent surplus rule, taking £10 billion a year out more than was required to run a balanced economy, cutting £50 billion a year more than was required to run a balanced current budget, left us with some terrible consequences. They were as discretionary consolidation, tax rises and cuts took place, the ratio of cuts to tax rises also increased. It placed the burden of austerity and an arbitrary fiscal target on the back of the poor. It's made the lowest decile 5% worse off and the richest 10% almost entirely all better off. So the government has clearly worked something out, and I do welcome move on the taper. But let's be clear, at 2 pence in the pound on the minimum wage, it's 14 pence an hour. It's not a king's ransom. It will not cure poverty. The squeeze has not been lifted from the poor. The screw of the welfare cap has not been turned off. This has simply made a brutal regime slightly less brutal. However, I'm glad he mentioned the actions of the Bank of England. Our party very much welcome what the Governor has done. An increase in QE, 60 billion of extra government bond purchases, 10 billion available for corporate bond purchases, 0.25% base rate, additional term funding to make more and cheaper lending from the banks. However, there's been an almost complete absence of a fiscal policy stimulus in order to match the incredible monetary policy activism of the central bank. So the key aspect of today's autumn statement, and I'm also pleased it's the last one, given this is now my 25th budget autumn statement or pre-budget statement. The key part of today's autumn statement was the increase in total managed expenditure. But over the 15-16, 20-21 forecast period, like for like, it amounts to 1.5% of total managed expenditure. It is to be welcome. It's certainly a break from the recent past. but it can be in no way described as the sort of fiscal stimulus required to match the monetary policy discipline of the central bank. So the two other aspects he's talked about was an increase in capital investment. I very much welcome that, and the increase in research and development. But given the research and development description has changed in the Green Book, as has the description of the UK TI funding, and he said there would be a doubling of some aspects of export support, it's hard to tell precisely what the impact of some of those measures are. So I hope he can tell us, in total, what is the increase in cash terms and in percentage terms of export support absolutely vital? What is, again, the overall increase in research and development across the piece? And how does he intend to see deployed the £23 billion he described in terms of capital investment?
The Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure. I might have to consult my honourable and right honourable friends. I'm not sure if that was a thank you or not. I think it might have been. What I'd say, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, what we have announced today is a significant increase in capital investment, and capital investment includes research and development under the ONS definition. Scotland will get £800 million of that. R&D, of course, is not Barnetised. R&D will be spread across the whole of the UK, but the infrastructure element will be Barnetised, and Scotland will get £800 million. But I just say this to the honourable gentleman. Scotland's economic performance also needs attention. Scotland's productivity also needs addressing. And I very much hope, and I'm sure that families and businesses across Scotland will very much hope that he can confirm, or one of his colleagues can confirm, that the Scottish Government will use this additional funding in the spirit that it is being raised for the rest of the United Kingdom to invest in raising the productivity performance of the Scottish economy. I would very much welcome that. He asked about the detailed productivity message. I can assure him there is no lack of enthusiasm in this government for tackling the productivity challenge. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, the Treasury and other departments are involved in a process which will lead to a green paper allowing us to consult extensively with business and other outside bodies before we firm up exactly how to deliver the strategy. But what the House has seen today is £23 billion of additional investment, alongside £150 billion already committed to investment in economic infrastructure over the period, that will form the backbone for that policy and its delivery. And I just say to the honourable gentleman this, and he knows this very well, he probably wouldn't admit it, but he knows it very well. The biggest drag on growth in Scotland, survey after survey shows, the biggest drag on business investment is the continuing threat of a second referendum. Bigger than, well, he needs to go back and look at the polling data. Bigger than concerns about possible future Brexit arrangements is the concern about a second Scottish independence referendum. And I just say this to him in response to his specific points. I will be publishing a distributional analysis. I believe it's available in the Vote Office now, of the measures that have been announced today, and cumulatively of the measures that have been announced throughout this Parliament. It will not show the outcome that the honourable gentleman suggested. So perhaps he'd like to look at that, and then we can no doubt have another exchange on this at Treasury Questions. The overall package of measures today represents a fiscal loosening of around £23 billion. I acknowledge that that is a reduction of a planned fiscal tightening, but of course there has to be a fiscal tightening over time, because we are moving to living within our means with a balanced budget in the next Parliament, and we are not going to be deflected from that intention. Finally, just to clear up the confusion, the budget of UKTI is now rolled into the budget of the Department for International Trade. What I announced in my statement was that the capacity of, that is the risk capacity of UK export finance, will be doubled so that it can provide finance for exporters from all over the UK to sell their goods abroad on credit.
George Osborne.
Can I warmly congratulate my friend and successor on a strong statement and an assured delivery. Can I particularly welcome the additional support for the Northern Powerhouse? The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility has given us a very sober assessment of the economic and borrowing challenges that Britain faces, and the Chancellor is right to keep his powder dry, but he's also right to adhere to the principles that we control current spending, that we make sure that work pays and make the welfare and tax reforms necessary to deliver that, that we make Britain the best place to attract business, and we have the freest possible trade with our key export markets, and I support all the things he's doing to deliver on those principles.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. The principles that he set out will guide the actions of this government, as they should guide the actions of any sensible government, as we try to future-proof our economy in a time of extraordinary change, not only political change but technological change. We are facing a period of 20 or 30 years in which the way we work, the way we live, the way we do business will change fundamentally, and unless we invest now in our infrastructure, in our science and technology base, in our innovation capability, we risk being left behind, and that will not deliver the economy and the country that works for everyone that we are committed to.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the fact that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has adopted fiscal rules that his predecessor described as the single biggest risk to economic recovery, the ones we proposed in 2015. But I want to ask him about Brexit, because he said at the Tory party conference that the British people did not vote to become poorer. The OBR tells us on page 19, Mr. Speaker, that £58 billion of the worsening in the public finances is due to the Brexit decision. Isn't this a salutary warning to us about the decisions we take in the coming months and years? And isn't it a very strong argument for us remaining as close as possible to our largest trading area, the single market, and inside, not outside, the customs union?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister has said many times, and I'm very happy to repeat, and I've no doubt I shall be repeating many times today, it remains our objective to try to get the closest possible trading arrangement that we can with the European Union, the greatest access that we can for our goods and services to be sold into European markets after we leave the European Union. But the effect that I think we have to disaggregate two effects. There is, of course, going to be a period of uncertainty as we go through the process of exiting the European Union, and that has, as the OBR has identified, had a dampening effect on business investment. But we have also to rise to the challenge of getting ourselves match fit to seize the opportunities that this country will have after we complete that process. And I would urge him to think about that longer-term challenge as well as the short-term issues.
Andrew Turry.
Can I congratulate the Chancellor on delivering a crucial statement for the country? It was a budget in all but name, and I strongly support his decision to make it the first of many autumn budgets, something that a number of us on the Treasury Committee have been pressing for a while. The statement will provide reassurance and certainty for the whole country. Given that the education sector creates export earnings of £20 billion, that's about the same as the car manufacturing sector, will the Chancellor soon be able to provide our colleges and universities with the certainty and reassurance they need that foreign students will not be caught by the 100,000 migration target?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'm grateful to the Chairman of the Treasury Select Committee for his remarks, and indeed for the committee's work on single fiscal event. It's very much appreciated, and I do think it's the right way for us to go. On the specific question that he's asked, as he knows, students are included within the 100,000 or the tens of thousands target, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is looking at how best to manage student flows in the interests of what, as he says, is a very important industry in this country.
Mr Chris Leslie.
Mr. Speaker, a few months ago, the Foreign Secretary promised the general public that by now we would have an extra £350 million a week for the National Health Service. Yet, strangely, since the referendum, he's just announced growth falling, business investment collapsing, an extra £110 billion of borrowing over the forecast period when compared with March. And I don't see any of his Leave colleague campaigners on the front bench. Has he received an apology yet from the Foreign Secretary or any of them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not responsible for remarks that may or may not have been made during political campaigns. What I will say to him is that the British people have made a decision to leave the European Union. We must respect that decision. If we are going to make a success of this process, if we are going to ensure the success of the British economy in the future, we have to move on from keep having this sterile debate over and over again. We have to focus our attention on building an economy that is match fit for the future and that will enable us to deliver high living standards as we make our way in the world.
Mr. John Redwood.
Someone who is much more optimistic about the prospects for the UK economy under the Chancellor's stewardship than the OBR usually are, may I welcome very much the increased OBR forecast for this year, a faster rate of growth now than there won pre the vote, and may I welcome their recognition there will be no winter recession post the vote in the way some forecast. But will he agree with me that the OBR are probably still quite wrong about 2017? Their forecast is too low, their borrowing forecast far too high, and we will get good access to the single market once we're out of the EU.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I very much hope on the last point that my right honourable friend is right, and that will, of course, be our objective. And I'm grateful to him for his implicit confidence in my stewardship. But look, Mr. Speaker, I have to, I'm well aware of my right honourable friend's views. They are, as always, long-standing and utterly consistent. But it is not my job to opine on the report that the OBR has made by statute to Parliament. It is my job to respond to it, and that is what I have done today. Obviously, economic forecasting is not a precise science, and I absolutely recognise, as would the OBR, that individual members will have their own views on the likely future trajectory of our economy. It's probably worth mentioning that the OBR very specifically says in its report that there is an unusually high degree of uncertainty in the forecasts that it's making because of the unusual circumstances.
Meg Hillier.
Mr. Speaker, in a long statement, we heard no mention of the National Health Service. And in the first 6 months so far this year, the deficit is 648 million for trusts alone, with a year-end deficit forecast of 669 million. Given the extraordinary measures the Department of Health had to go to balance its budget in the last financial year, and given those projections, what is the Chancellor doing to make sure there's a sustainable future for our National Health Service?
Well, I say to the Honourable Lady, I might be a novice at autumn statements, but I'm not such a rookie that I didn't mention the NHS, so I suggest she checks the Hansard. She'll find that I very definitely did. And look, she talks about a projected trust deficit, aggregate trust deficit of £648 million projected at a point which is 4 months out from the end of the fiscal year. This is in the context of a budget of £110 billion in an NHS that holds a contingency reserve at the centre. And my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, is well aware of these pressures. They're not particularly unusual. They are being managed inside the NHS, and of course I am keeping and will continue to keep a very close eye on them with my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on a wide range of measures, short-term, medium and long-term, which will undoubtedly turbocharge our economy and give it the boost boost it needs as we face the realities of Brexit. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that it's never been more important for British business to be at the very heart of local enterprise partnerships, great ideas like the Midland Engine, and indeed all those infrastructure plans? And it's not to be driven by politicians, but these sorts of projects must be driven by British business.
Well, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I'm grateful for her comments. It isn't just that we need business to be engaged at the heart of this process, and I passionately believe that is the right way to do it, and local enterprise partnerships are a good innovation for delivering that, as well as the area-specific project organisations. But this is also part of meeting the challenge of regional imbalance, which, as I said earlier, isn't just a social problem, it's an economic problem. And when we look at our productivity gap with other advanced economies, we should look, logically, for the things that are different in our country to those comparators. And the gap between our capital city and our other cities and regions is one of the defining features of the UK economy. And by working with businesses across the country and in the UK regions, particularly by promoting our regional cities, we can start at last to address this problem.
Randy Burnham.
The north of England is crying out for a plan for investment in rail, and people will be left asking today, where is it? But it is also crying out for investment in social care. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, it is unbelievable that the Chancellor could find no mention for it today. 6 years of cuts to social care have left a record number of older people trapped in hospital and the NHS on the brink, with a dangerous winter now facing us. Can the Chancellor say a little more about how he came to the judgment that new grammar schools is a higher spending priority than the funding of the care of older people?
I'm a little bit surprised at the Right Honourable Gentleman, as a former Chief Secretary, not actually being able to distinguish between capital and resource, because of course the funding that we're talking about for grammar schools is capital spending. I said in the course of my statement that the Department for Transport will continue the discussions on Northern Powerhouse Rail with Transport for the North and make announcements in due course. He asked me specifically about social care, and of course right honourable members opposite are very fond of talking about cuts to social care budgets. Local authorities have to manage their budgets as they think best. They have to manage the envelope of resource that they're given. And what we've done, Mr. Speaker, is created a Better Care Fund that by the end of this Parliament will be delivering £1.5 billion a year into social care. We have allowed local authorities to raise a social care precept, which by the end of this Parliament will be delivering another £2 billion a year. That's £3.5 billion a year of additional funding into the social care system. Now, what I would say to the honourable gentleman is this. What I would accept is this. There is an issue that local authorities are raising, and we've heard what they are saying, about the profiling, about how this large amount of additional money ramps up. And that's an issue that my Right Honourable friend, the Health Secretary, my Right Honourable friend, the Communities Secretary, are extremely aware of and are discussing with them.